What is that? It's like from the future. Oh, it's future times. Hey everybody, Dan Schinder here on Yesshift with my partner
Steven Schinder.
That's right, he's actually the boss, and we're cousins.
Son.
Oh yeah, father son. Okay, I always get that confused. We are thrilled to have with us Kevin Mulryne, the author of this amazing book that was a mountain of work, I'm sure. We'll dig into that. Second offender. This is the second time you've been on, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll
Good to be back.
We will try not to mess it up. Well, I will try not to mess it up this time. So, Steve, I'll let you kick it off.
Right. So we're talking about your book, Yes, the Tormato story, and Tormato, the album itself. So
and the tour.
Yeah, and the tour.
Or is it tour?
Yeah. Yeah. So I wasn't sure if we want to begin with how we each came to the Tormato album, like really briefly, or
yeah. And let's start with Kevin. Kevin, for those who haven't read the book yet, give them a teaser on how you came upon the album. I thought it was a very interesting story how Oliver did, who wrote the foreword for this. How did you come about the album?
So the album was lent to me by a guy who went on to be the best man at my wedding, a guy called Chris, and he taped it from his brother's copy of Tormato, and on the other side he taped a copy of his brother's 90125.
That's right.
So it was 1983, and 90125 had just come out. I'd heard some of that music on the television or on radio and so on, but I'd never heard any other Yes music at all. So I got this tape, and I played 90125 first, and then I flipped it over, and there was Tormato. It's the first progressive rock I'd ever heard, and the first Yes I'd ever heard, and it completely blew my socks off, as they say. And that was the beginning of my 40-year or whatever it is obsession with Tormato, and to a certain extent 90125, but definitely Tormato.
That's awesome.
That's a unique start. I don't remember if you mentioned this, but what was the third Yes album? Like, what was the next one that you went to after these two?
I think I went out as soon as I could and bought Close to the Edge, purely because I suppose it was the only other one that the record shop had at the time. And so I got hold of that, and then I worked out from there. And my mother actually made an unwise decision. She said that if I got into college, this was a couple of years later, if I got into college, she would buy me all the other Yes albums on vinyl.
But that's an incentive.
Yeah. So I did get into college, and so yes, we went down to the local record shops and bought Drama and Yes songs and all those other ones, and it cost her a fortune, but there you go.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's a good reason to go to college.
Absolutely.
There's I don't want to eat up too much time with this great question, Steve, but I got to ask Kevin. So what was it like going back in time from 90125 to Tormato and then Close to the Edge? Like, was that too weird for you, or did it make sense that it progressed the way? Like, what went through your head turning that on?
Yeah, I mean, totally different albums, of course. And the thing which puzzled me was that, of course, in those days with no internet and very few books around that covered Yes at all, I couldn't find any books that covered Yes,
Right.
and very little about the classic period in the press of the time. And they were all covering 90125, and they mentioned these albums that I'd never heard or hadn't heard yet. And yeah, I saw the connection. I suppose in a way it was mainly to begin with John Anderson's voice, because that was unique, as we know it is, and it was on those three albums in that order that I came across. And I was also a classical musician, so I was a classically trained violinist and singer, and so Close to the Edge being a whole side long didn't really bother me, because I was used to playing symphonies and all those sorts of things. So long form music wasn't so much of a surprise to me, I suppose. And after having heard On the Silent Wings of Freedom, it was just longer and more complex and in some ways more exciting. version of Yes. So yeah, it was great.
Interesting. I think that if aliens landed and said, "We've heard of Yes," well, they have heard of Yes. If we've heard of Yes, what 3 albums should we listen to? I think those 3 cover a lot of bases,
yeah.
right? Yeah, that's
yeah.
neat. Steve, how about you? I don't even remember how you came across Tormato or when that was or how old you were.
Yeah, like, so I was very much the, Rhino remaster CDs generation. So if they came in like 3 waves, this is a CD I have, and this one came out in 2004, so I probably got it sometime in the middle of that year or later that year. Like, I'm pretty sure you gave it to me, and I have this memory of like you, me, and maybe my brother Alex were all going to the mall or something, and we were listening to this, and most of this I had not heard before. Like, I'd heard, the bit of that behind the scenes clip of On the Silent Wings of Freedom on the Yes Years video. I'd heard the live version of Onward from Keys to Ascension. So putting this on, and the opening notes from Future Times, like, I was immediately impressed, and it was just like new Yes music to me. Like, most of this was new to me, so I was just eating it up. And I would argue that, in my opinion, this has the best set of bonus tracks from the Yes re-releases of that era.
That's a good point. Yeah. So Kevin, the amount of work and research that must have gone into this, how long did it take from conception to birth of the book? Because it just seems like such a mountain of work.
Yes, there was a huge amount of work, but it was all exciting, interesting work. Yeah. And the whole idea was that I wanted to write a book about Yes, and the album I've always been obsessed with since I got it was Tormato, and I was desperate to find out everything I could about it, from how the sounds were created in the studio to how the artwork was put together and all that. And as most of us are, rabbit holes are the most amazing and the most time-consuming things you can possibly go down. And I went down an awful lot of rabbit holes. So yes, it did take an awfully long time, and not just the research. Of course, I had the advantage of having the Yes Music podcast, so a lot of the research, not all of it, but a lot of the research I could do live, as it were, on the podcast. So talk to people. So it wasn't just a case of reading books. It was a case of finding some people who were there at the time, quite a few people who were there at the time, and asking them to come on the podcast for interviews, and then getting those interviews transcribed and forming them into chapters. So yes, I mean, it took months, and as part of it, I started an email newsletter, which I do weekly, and I still do. It's morphed into something slightly different now, but for those people who wanted to support the progress of the book, and also put their hands in their pockets and give me some money as pre-orders, so that I could actually get for example, the typesetting done, or the cover created for me. And so those were fantastically generous people who came in early at that stage. But yes, they were hanging around for months and months and months. I suppose 18 months, 20 months, something like that it took from inception to actually releasing the book.
Interesting. And Steve, while I give my story of how I came across the album, go ahead and pop the link in the comments and pin it to where people can get the book. It's a great read. It's a great listen. My story isn't that glamorous. It's pretty standard. I think on the last week of being on tour as a musician, and a very close friend of mine, I had called him, and he said, "Hey, Yes I grew up in LA, Kevin." So he said, "Yes is coming to the Forum." I think it was October 6th or 4th. This was 1978, of course, and their new album's coming out. I'm going to buy us tickets. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Go for it. So I got the album when it came out, literally a week and a half before I saw them, yet I still managed to run my needle through the grooves of both sides so you could see through it in that amount of time, so I'd know the music. And that was the first time I saw Yes, in the round from about the 6th row at the LA Forum. and it was incredible. It was just incredible. And I don't have enough words for it, you know, and many of us have experienced that. But another question I want to throw out, Steve and I touched on this briefly. We don't talk a lot before our shows. We want it to be nice and organic. You know, as Steve mentioned earlier, this divisive album, the polarizing album at the time, 1978, Going for the One was the first one in a long time that had more shorter songs. Then you had all the long form stuff before that with Relayer, Close to the Edge, Tales from Topographic Oceans in the middle. A lot of people were critical of it and disappointed, if I can use that. My question to you is this, as a fellow fan and someone who just also loves the music, had that album had Roger Dean's artwork, do you think that automatically would have eliminated some sort of stigma that people had because of this wacky cover that just they weren't used to, and it didn't go with that Yes sound? Because Roger's art is just such a marriage, the visual to the sound, that I think some of that might have something to do with it personally. But what do you think?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? And the stories. I mean, in a way, it's a good thing that it didn't have Roger Dean cover, because it made the research and the stories that I uncovered about the artwork so much more interesting and so much more fascinating to find out. But yes, I suppose it was one of a set of missing aspects of Tormato, which you would have expected to have seen. Of course, you had Going for the One straight before this, which also had the Hypnosis artwork on it. So perhaps it was unsurprising that this album didn't have it either. And it was only when, how can I put it, John Anderson was part of the reason why Hypnosis were taken on to do Going for the One and Tormato, and he wanted to do something different. And that's one of the fantastic things about John Anderson. He always wanted to push it forward. He always wanted to do something different. Whether he fell out with Roger Dean or not, or whatever, I'm not sure. But certainly Hypnosis worked on the art direction, not the actual artwork, but the art direction of Elias of Sun Hillow. Yeah. So he knew Hypnosis, and then they worked on some tour books as well, I think. So he certainly knew the guys at Hypnosis and was keen for them to do something and move the band onwards. And he'd seen other classic bands like Pink Floyd, etc., use this company, and so he wanted to be at the cutting edge of popular music, and this was part of it. But yes, had it gone back to a Roger Dean, then never judge a book by its cover, but everyone does, and certainly that's true with rock music, very much so.
Yeah, part of it comes from my own experience, thinking forward a touch from that point when Drama came out, and I didn't know anything about Trevor Horn or Jeff Downes, but when that album came out and it had Roger Dean's artwork on it, I immediately knew I was going to like the music, even though I had no idea what to expect. And then that was a big surprise, of course. So that's kind of where my question came from, my own sort of presumption when I saw Drama.
And I do have a response to your question, Dad, because it really made me think. And before I do, I'll read a few comments real quick. Peter de Moore says, most powerful podcasts in the universe unite. So Yes
how
Shift,
sweet.
a Yes Music podcast.
Nice.
Kind.
Dave Watkinson says, I bought
Tormato
in Bolton when it was released. I also asked the record shop for the shop displays and collected all I could. The shows obviously were the highlight, but I got lucky to be there with Yes in the studio. I think Yes should open with Future Times. It's uplifting. And just a reminder, let's not talk about the current set list, because there are people who still want to go in spoiler free, so just a reminder. Brian Breen says, hi Kevin, wonderful book, I inhaled it in 3 days. I'm gonna put this out there. Tormato is the most underrated Yes album, the latter magnification on that list too. Arriving UFO, Future Times, Rejoice, and Release are among the most underrated Yes songs, and the latter is the 90s version of Tormato, mostly short form music. Interesting.
And I just want to comment on that. Onward, to me, is also, I won't say underrated, it's underexposed. It's so buried in this album that is, I guess, considered obscure. It
Well,
might be
I feel like over the years it's had a resurgence, like now and then.
probably partly
Like,
because of keys and the dedication of
yeah,
Chris.
some
It's
other live stuff.
one of the
Yeah.
most beautiful Yes songs. It's just amazing. It's right there with "To Be Over." And but Steve, go on
Yeah.
with your take on that.
Yeah. So at first, when I thought of your question, like, would Roger Dean artwork have changed people's perception of the music? I was thinking, you know what, maybe it would have. But then thinking more deeply about, I mean, obviously people would have been quicker to grab it off the shelf because, Roger Dean is Roger Dean. But I think the perception of the music wouldn't have been that different. And my frame of reference for
Okay.
this is that, some Yes albums of recent years, people, like, despite the artwork being as incredible looking as it is, Roger Dean's newer stuff, people will still say, well, I didn't really vibe with this album. They hear what they hear. So I'm not so sure that Roger Dean's artwork would have changed the perception that drastically in terms of like how people hear the music, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Very interesting. Another thing that came up that you spent. So before I say this, I want to tell everybody, folks, it's so much more than what I expected. Like I thought, okay, great. The story of how they made the album. It's so much more. You get so granular with the gear, and I love that as a musician. The gear and how they had to track down gear and the stuff that went on. I won't give too much away, but in the warehouse and just so much. But one of the things that I really was like, aha moment was when you went through towards the end, the numerological aspect of that album and those different things. And my wife is very much into numerology. So I played that section of Rejoice for her. Then I played that section on Audible from your book, and her eyes just got like really big. There's like a whole big long story or insert booklet just on that you could do. I found that quite attentive and very interesting. So thank you for adding that in. Just so observant. There's so much to this book. I can't say that enough.
Yeah. I mean, that's a guy called James Martin. I don't know how to pronounce his first name, but
yeah,
and yeah, that's there's an interesting one because when I had my wonderful and very helpful what do they call them, beta readers who were reading the thing before it was released, I had a variety of different reactions to that point, because it's the lyrical mystical interpretation section of the book, and it's directly from that guy James Martin. And some people who read it thought it really shouldn't be in the book, and
wonder why. It's relevant.
And other people who read it were fine with it and thought it was interesting. And I thought it was interesting because the Yes lyrics, and particularly on albums like Tormato maybe, I haven't paid as much attention to in the past as I probably should have done. And, there are obvious barriers, particularly when the lyrics are created by John Anderson, because in these 70s albums, as we know, John Anderson's lyrics are at the very least obscure, and at the at the very most totally indecipherable. And he's said many times that yes, they are based on things, but on the other hand, he also has this tendency to use the sound of the lyrics, the sound of the words,
right, to form notes,
like and to form notes. Absolutely. So and you can believe, or you can think that this mystical interpretation is correct, or it's just an interesting way of looking at it. I found it a very interesting way of looking at it, which is why I wanted to have it in that chapter about the lyrics.
And I think the most revealing thing about it, and why you can't leave it out once you know it, is just like one of our viewers / listeners, Gilly Goodnews, says, be sure to ask Kevin about what the working title was. And that was The 11th Illusion, which I think is a wonderful name, especially when you have these other elements sort of woven in and baked into the lyrics and the songs. What is your take on that, of them changing the name rather than The 11th Illusion?
Oh, gosh, the name. That's a chapter on its own, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think the idea of The 11th Illusion was to tie in with what they wanted to do on stage. And in interviews done at the time of creating the album, they talked about the stage show where they wanted to have some magical type illusions on stage, and the most obvious one of those was they wanted to appear on the stage as if by magic. So they didn't want to be seen just walking across to the stage, and they wanted to appear there. Now that proved to be impossible on the Tormato tour, but they did actually manage to do it on the next tour, which was also partly in the round. It wasn't always in the round, but
in drama too.
Tour. Yeah, the drama tour. That's right. They had the round stage, and they used, as I say in the book, they used the world's oldest magical trick in order to get them onto the stage unseen, which is misdirection. So just before they were supposed to come on screen, all the lights lit up one entrance to the arena, of course the stage being in the middle, one entrance to the arena. Everybody looks over there to see the band coming on, and they actually come in through the other door on the other side of the arena. And they were smuggled to the stage and went underneath the stage in the technical area and climbed up the middle of the stage. There was a curtain around them. They lifted up the curtain, and there were the band in the middle. So everybody was very surprised that they managed to appear as if by magic. But they didn't manage to do that. But they did want to create some illusions, and that goes back to, I think it's all kind of bound up together, that when they were creating the album, they didn't know that they were going to use this circular rotating stage,
right? And
they didn't know what the name of the album was going to be in the end. So 11th Illusion, I managed to uncover this story about a completely different set of effects and so on that was originally planned for the Tormato tour, which was a huge video screen, 100 feet long or whatever it was, 200 feet long or whatever, video screen. And there was going to be documentary. So possibly some of that documentary footage that you see on the behind the scenes video of Don't Kill the Whale. Sorry, not Don't Kill the Whale.
On the Silent Wings of Freedom.
Silent Wings of Freedom, yes, thank you. So possibly that was going to be part of this amazing film behind the band or next to the band or something. And they even went as far as sourcing a screen to use on stage in the US. But of course that never happened. Yeah. And I think possibly that had and lasers as well. They the band are renowned for their use of lasers in live shows and were one of the first bands to do that. Yeah. But that didn't come about either. And so I think it was possibly down to the circular stage, which was created by Michael Tate, who has just been introducing the band, and they've been back to the Tits, haven't they? And done the warm-up gig there, introduced by the legendary Michael Tate, and he had the idea for the rotating stage. And so in the midst of that, I think the ideas of trying to do the whole theme of mystical illusions and so on was put to one side. But again, there's quite a complicated story about the name of the album. I asked both Rick Wakeman and Steve Howe directly about the name change, and nobody can really remember. There are those who swear blind that Rick did not throw a tomato at the cover. He absolutely maintains that he did. Steve can't remember exactly how it happened, and neither can Aubrey Poe.
Yeah,
who I had an email conversation with. They can't remember, and Rick says that Brian Lane suggested that they call it, once he'd seen the tomato squashed against the artwork, he said, well, why don't you call it Yes Tour then? Because they were originally going to call it, after the 11th Illusion, they were going to call it Yes Tour. But then, he said, well, you better call it Yes Tormato then. And I think in a way it's fitting that it was kind of an in-joke.
Yeah.
The band were desperately unimpressed with the artwork when it was finished. They didn't like it at all. And I suppose it, as I say, it fits that it was a joke. Tormato being a pun on Yes Tor and this fruit that had been thrown against the album. So in a way, it all worked together, even if you thought it worked very badly.
Yeah, I think that the whole putting the tomato on the cover, some people will say that was a mistake, but I think in the long run, it really adds to the mythology and like the humor. If like just look at the history of the band, and like it makes for a nice. Oh, I'm doing that wrong. Like just putting that on the cover of the book and the colored supplement of the Tormato story, like
the theme,
and like when people were getting copies of these, they, and myself included, would post pictures of the book next to like some tomato based items, and it just I don't know, there's just something really fun about that.
I'm glad that I'm glad that the tomato didn't make it to this. I have my original Yes program, and you can tell this is from the 10 True Summers tour because it's got pictures of the original tour the year before. And when I flipped through this, when I dug it out, I got to show you something I found. I made this picture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I forgot about it. I dug this off my shelf back there, and I totally forgot that I had drawn that. And I must have been a
picture of John with a guitar and singing.
Yeah, for those just listening, And I actually have one of those guitars too. John inspired me. I always wanted one, and about 20 years later, I got a Quattro.
Well, it also gave the band the opportunity to do some neat, but really bizarre advertising tie-ins. So that's the thing there that I've got one of. I know Dave Watkinson's got one of those as well. Right. And if you want to get yourself one of these, I think they call them standees. So these were point of sale adverts for the sale of the album. And again, for those of you not seeing the pictures here, it's a picture of me holding up this tomato jar, I suppose it is. It's got a sort of 3D standout lid on it, and tomato at the bottom, which is spilling off the bottom, and the whole thing, you can stand it up on a counter. And I've never really understood the sort of food music metaphor, but also that has just come up today on eBay. Another one of those.
Oh wow!
Not in as good shape as mine, and it's I can't remember exactly the price, but I can actually. It was $2,999. We'll buy.
Wow!
We'll buy you a copy of that. I did not spend $2,999 on that item, I can tell you. But
what an interesting collector's item from the whole Yes legacy. I wonder what really any other POP sales items like that would go for other albums, and how that ranks with the pricing versus like Fragile, Close to the Edge, or whatever. That's a whole book.
Yes, it is. Well, that's the problem with this, is that once you dig into stuff, it just goes on and on.
And Paul Watson commented asking if you ever figured out like what type of tomato it was. I saw Doug Curran chime in saying it's the Abraham Lincoln variety, or at least that those are popular at that time, but I don't know.
I thought it was a heirloom. I think it's an heirloom tomato.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I certainly know something that this is in the 70s, and I grew up in the 70s. I was 8 when the tomato was thrown. So my recollection is that, unlike today in the UK, you really could only get one kind of tomato. So it'll be that kind, whatever that was.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Huh.
Yeah, there were very few variations in tomatoes at the time, just because the British palate was so basic in those days. Yeah, I remember it well.
Interesting. So I have to ask a question, and then Steve has a follow-up question to this. I enjoyed this so much. Is there a chance you'll do this for every other Yes album, let alone any other Yes albums? And if so, what would you pick to do it on? It was so enjoyable.
Well, every other Yes album would be a bit of an undertaking, because I'd have to multiply 18, 20 months by 29 records or whatever it is now.
But you're a young guy.
Up to. I'm a young guy, absolutely. So I probably won't ever get around to all of them. I have started work on not quite the same, but a similar project for Tales from Topographic Oceans.
Ooh.
And so going from one divisive album to another, and a double album and a complex album, it's going to be quite fun. But we have kicked that off already, and so what we're planning to do is rather than the story of Tales from Topographic Oceans, like I've done, the Tormato story, we're making it into a bit of a guide. So it's an album guide, and then we may move on to other albums after that. Probably we'll move on to other albums after we've completed this one. So I'm researching it in the same sort of way, but rather than chapters about different aspects, there will be chapters about different aspects, but then there will be a guide to listening. So side one, here are some things to look out for. This is how they got this sound. This was their approach at this point. Listen to these interesting lyrics here, and this is the reason why they put them in. And that sort of approach, going through the album, in minutes and seconds, rather than telling an elaborate story. But there will be elements of elaborate story because I can't avoid them. And I've already been down one huge rabbit hole about this, which has been absolutely great fun and has to do with Roxy Music. But I'll leave you tantalized there with that.
I appreciate that. And I know this is unsolicited, but I'm filling out an imaginary slip and putting it in the suggestion box for this album. So first of all, it's my Stuck on an Island album. It's one of my favorite works by Roger Dean. And I knew Alan since 1989. He was a big supporter of Drum Talk TV, my other business. And he was on the show many times. And a couple times I asked him during the Ancient, how did you get that sound where you can hear the vibes going along with the organ, but then there's this other clickety-clack sound, and I've tried to, and I think this is how he did it, I tried to replicate that sound by playing what I think he's playing on the side of my timpani drums. I have two timpani drums in my setup because I'm a weirdo.
Yes, I know the sound you mean, yes.
So I asked him like 2 or 3 times, and his answer was always trade secret. And a voice inside my head was, is it really a trade secret, or does he not remember? Because your book has proven that sometimes there's a Mandela effect amongst different people. No one remembers it the same. So if you find the answer to that, the book itself would be worth that to me. But I've made that sound by doing that, but I don't know if that's how we did it. I don't know.
No, and sadly, of course, we can't ask.
Alan
that now, but
Steve might know, Rick might know, someone might know.
So okay. Well, I'll put it on my list. I've already got quite a long list of things I want to find out about Tales, as you can imagine.
Yeah, and speaking of double albums, how different do you think the reception for Tormato would have been if they had gone with the double album idea?
As planned, yeah.
Yeah, and are there any tracks like from those sessions that have come out as bonus tracks or whatnot that you think would have fit well on Tormato if the vinyl limit wasn't a concern?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because they don't know if we can always believe bands, particularly when they're writing an album, because anytime you ask a band during the writing of an album, is it going to be good? They will always say, "Oh yes, this is our best album ever," because why would they say anything different? But when they were creating Tormato, they did spend a long time rehearsing, and allegedly they were working on about 25, I think it was, songs, and of course we only have 8 on Tormato. So the idea was to put those others on a second disc, a second album, or at least that's what John Anderson said, and he seemed to be, Chris Squire seemed to be in agreement with him, and it always seems to be John and Chris who go for these crazy madcap ideas first and then have to persuade everyone else, maybe. Well, perhaps not, but anyway, they certainly were keen on this idea of a second release sometime in 78 or probably early 79. So yes, they had all this material allegedly. Now, I asked Rick whether any of those songs from those sessions, from those rehearsals, made it onto the aborted Paris sessions, for example, because that was the next time that the band were together recording, and it would have made sense if they'd taken some of those discarded songs that they were going to put on the second album of Tormato and worked on them in Paris. But in fact, he said, no, absolutely not. Everything that was recorded in Paris, from his point of view, was a brand new work, was a brand new song. So they definitely didn't retain anything from there. And I've not been able to find out what those alleged. I suppose they would be, then theoretically they were rehearsing another 11, 12 songs, or 14 songs. So it starts to sound a little bit far-fetched. And certainly the songs that we know were recorded in Rack, because speaking to Peter Woolscroft, who was the tape operator at Advision, they didn't really record any of those additional songs. They just recorded the 8 that we have on the record itself. They didn't work on any other recordings at Advision, and Peter Woolscroft was there every day, so he's a pretty good, and made notes and diary entries about those sessions. So certainly they will have been recorded at Rack, and the ones that we know were recorded at Rack don't really. I can see why they were abandoned. Put it like that. so songs like Money and so on. They're all right, and even Abilene, which appeared on the B-side of some, but not all, singles from the album. It's not a favourite of mine. I know a lot of people do like it, and they love the Steve Howe guitar work, particularly on it. But it's not a favourite of mine, so I don't think there's a great deal left to find. And of course, we spoke to I'm going to forget his name now. The editor guy who did Brian Cahew, whose job it was to look through all the master tapes from that time in the vault at Warner Brothers.
Right. And
he went through all those tapes from those sessions, and he didn't find anything else other than what was put on the expanded and remastered. And all those tracks on the expanded and remastered Tormato aren't all from the Tormato sessions. Some are from different times. So
interesting.
So I don't think there is a great deal else left around from that time.
Interesting.
I'm gonna read off the track list for the original album real quick. So we got Featured Times, Rejoice, Strong Opener, Don't Kill the Whale, which, up until reading this book, I never really questioned what Said to Sia meant, but once I read that part, I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Same here.
And it has kind of an odd music video, as does Madrigal, although I really love the ring that the yes-shaped ring in the Madrigal video. Madrigal is a very beautiful song, and then you get the rocking release. Like when I listened to this as a kid, I was like so pumped listening to this. And then I think the next couple tracks, Arriving UFO and Circus of Heaven, are the more contentious ones. Like I think some people think they're silly, which I can see. I personally think Circus of Heaven, like I always saw it as kind of a heartfelt song and very fantastical. Then we get the beautiful Onward, which we talked about, and On the Silent Wings of Freedom, which like Future Times has always been my favorite. I know Silent Wings is a favorite among many, but for whatever reason, I didn't have it ranked high up there. But on the more recent listen, I guess I was more impressed with the keyboard work on that than before for some reason. But I think out of the tracks from around this era, the ones that I would have included, that if there were no like runtime limit to worry about, I do enjoy Abilene. I probably would have put that right before Madrigal, and maybe after Madrigal include the song Richard. I think that has some great melodies, is very great. And then You Can Be Saved is a very great Squire number. Like maybe put that before or after Onward. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on that whole thing.
Interesting. One of the other things, and we're being mindful of your time. We've only got like an hour and a half left, folks. One of the other things, Kevin, that I really was surprised by and absolutely appreciated was two things. The way, and I won't give anything away, but the way you rated the different iterations of the release in different mediums and their audio quality, that whole process was very interesting. And along with that, the way you explained the differences and variations of the different releases in different regions, the US versus Canada versus France versus Colombia versus Argentina, and so on. And funny thing is, I'm going to show some of the covers. When I was looking for these covers for the show, and folks, that's the original US release there. I came across a site. I just Google image searched Tormato, and this site seems to have all the different variations of the covers and the sleeves. It was quite interesting. So that's the original front cover. Here's the original back cover with the musicians. I love the story of Chris forgetting his jacket.
I've got a vinyl copy here. I think my brother Alex gave that to me along with
I remember that
at some point.
And I always was intrigued by the artwork on the sleeves that went with the lyrics and whatnot. That I love maps and cartography, so to see that topographical, no pun intended, map of Yes Tour and all that, I think that was actually genius. And to me, it went with the album, even though Roger didn't do the artwork. I loved this kind of stuff. It just seemed to fit really, really well. So thanks for putting so much into those two aspects. And I mean, even with all we've talked about, folks, no matter what you think is included in this, you have no idea. There's so many surprises. It's really great. It really is. Very, very impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So how far along are you with the next project? And does it have a working title you can give away yet?
We're just going to call it, so the series is called the Yes Album Listening Guides, and this is the first one, Tales from Topographic Oceans. So it'll just be along those lines. And we've considered the concept of concept albums. We did an episode on that, and with specific reference to the concept of Tales from Topographic Oceans and whether it's important or whether it's absolutely relevant to the music, and how far it is actually used in the construction of Tales. And we've thought about some other aspects as well, the way the lyrics fit into that context as well. And so we've actually done 4 episodes of the Yes Music podcast about Tales and thinking about different aspects of it. Coming up though, I want to delve into the drums and the oh yes, of course we've had the keyboards. We've had a fantastic episode on the keyboards with Chris Dale, who is the guy who's not only, and there's a whole chapter about Byrotron in the Tormato book, of course. He has resurrected the Byrotron, which was created partly by Rick Wakeman, or at least he put some money into it. And he came and talked about the keyboards on Tales, and specifically the other thing which he has in his possession, which is Rick Wakeman's unique double mellotron, which appears on Tales. So we dug well into that, and subsequently Chris has sent me a lot more information about that double mellotron, which is absolutely fascinating and exactly the sort of thing that we want to know about. And my co-host Mark Anthony Kay is going to talk about the guitars soon, so Steve Howe's guitars. And we've also got Joey, everyone's friend Joey the drummer, from Total Master Retain. He's going to come and talk about Alan White's drums and a little bit about the specific drums that he used, and perhaps we'll get onto that question, Dan, of how he made that sound, but also about the differences. And Joey, as you know, has an encyclopedic knowledge of Alan and his approaches and so on. So he wants to talk about the difference in approach of Alan on the recorded record and what he did live for the Tales tracks when they were played live.
Nice.
we can't even mention the current controversy about that, obviously, because that would be spoilers. But yes, that should be fascinating to hear what he says about playing it live, because of course I'm not sure if he's played all four sides live himself, but he's certainly played some of Tales live himself. So he knows an awful lot about that. So I'm looking forward to that. And then we'll get into all the other Chris Squire's basses with Miguel Falcao again, and everything we will dig into.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I've played that whole album before, and it is so much fun to play. I just love it. One more little Easter egg nugget I would love to have dug up is that I always heard and read, I don't know why I never asked Alan this myself, that he plays piano somewhere on the album. And you don't have to give away where. Let them find that out in the book. But I'd love to know what part that is. I've always kind of guessed at it.
Yes, we know exactly where that is.
Great, okay.
And that will be in the book, yes.
Great.
Right.
So, awesome.
Yeah, so everyone can check out tormatobook.com as well as yesmusicpodcasts.com. Kevin, you have done the amazing work for this fandom, and I'm really glad we were able to have you on this episode to talk about this album, which has only half of it has gotten live play post the Tormato tour, but I honestly, I really enjoy this album, even though, you know, warts and all, if you even want to say that, I just really enjoy Tormato.
Absolutely, yeah. Right. Makes the book all that much more fun. And anytime you want to come on, give us a progress report of this project, or talk about anything else you're working on, or promote anything that you and Mark Anthony Kay are doing together, we're right here. You know, we love what you guys do and are happy to help spread the word.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. And we're going to record this week our 600th episode of the podcast. So that will have a special guest.
Congratulations.
And also, thank you.
And for those who don't know, that show's only been around 6 months, so they've been working hard.
Yeah, we have. And also we're going to have a special guest and also announce a charity appeal as part of our 600th
Nice.
episode.
Oh, great.
Listen out for that.
Wonderful. Can't wait to hear about that. Awesome. Well, hang on the line after we say goodbye to the audience. And audience, thank you so much for joining Kevin, Stephen, and myself on this fun episode about a wonderful book, the Tormato story. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we got just so much fun. And you can follow us on Facebook.com/Yesshift, YouTube.com/@Yesshift, Anchor.fm/Yesshift if you don't want to see us and just want to listen to us. But if you watch the visual versions, we're always cutting in images and sometimes clips and things like that. So thank you, folks, so much. We will see you again soon. Hang on with us, Kevin. We'll be right with you. Thanks, folks.